Hey there, I'm Matthew Shaner. This is LeVar, and today you're in for a treat. Our guest is the author of The End Times Again, 2,000 Years of the Use and Misuse of Bible Prophecy. Martyn Whittock is a licensed lay minister in the Church of England and was a high school teacher of history and religious studies for 35 years. Martyn is a historian who has authored and co-authored 54 books. As a commentator and columnist, he has written for a number of news platforms and has been interviewed on radio shows exploring the intersection of faith and politics. He has been a consultant for the BBC, English Heritage, and the National Trust. He has just completed Apocalyptic Politics, releasing later this year, which examines apocalyptic beliefs driving radicalization, including in Russia. Today, he is joining us from his home near Bath, UK. Welcome, Martyn.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, Martyn, I would like to take a moment for our audience just to get to know you a little bit more before we jump into your book. If you would, tell us a little about your walk with the Lord and land eventually on what drew you into eschatology. That's for the audience, that's the study of last things. And how have you seen your understanding change over time?
Well, I was raised in an evangelical household here in the UK with a great love of the Bible and also a very real interest in prophecy. In the 1970s, which were my teenage years, I became deeply focused, as a lot of people did at the time, on end times thinking of the kind found in the late great planet Earth, which people of a certain age will be familiar with. Then in my university studies, where I was reading politics at the University of Bristol, I came across 17th century groups saying similar things to what I was saying and getting it wrong in the 17th century. And it rather opened my eyes and made me think, oh, we've been here before. What should I take from this? So that caused me to pause, really. I kept up a continuing interest in Christian millenarianism during my teaching career. And in one part of that, I co-wrote Christ, the First 2,000 Years, and another book called When God Was King. And in the first one, I came across, again, 17th century millenarians who were saying very extreme end times things in the 17th century, the 16th century. And then the latter book, When God Was King, was actually looking at the British civil wars in the 17th century, when people were trying to create a theocracy here and were convinced that Christ was returning very, very soon. I came across the same sort of people there. And that really gave me a lot of cause to think about this, to reflect upon this, to feel a little bit concerned, perhaps, that over this period of time, Christians had repeated themselves again and again. And I came across it in other areas too. And I guess I landed in a position now where all of this has caused me to advise caution with regard to end time study. So I believe in the second coming of Christ, absolutely. But I also believe that the church has got it wrong again and again, and we have to be very cautious and very careful. And that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, it sounds like wisdom to me. Thank you for that. Let's jump into the end times again. Martyn, I was delighted as I began to read your book because you seem to be putting your finger on the pulse of a problem that I've been seeing in the church for years now, and that's this end times madness that seems to overtake us. Now, I would say this happens every decade, but these days it seems to be happening more frequent than that. You say in your book that it isn't intended to be an expose, but more of a study to understand our end times fascination. What drove you to write End Times Again?
Well, partly it was that background information that I referred to earlier on, that background realization that this had been done again and again and again in church history, and the church got it wrong again and again. As I looked at that information, that evidence, I began to think this should give us cause for concern. But for me, the trigger event occurred in 2016 when I saw end times beliefs deployed, I strongly felt, misused in the UK's referendum on membership of the European Union, the infamous Brexit, in attacks on the EU. Then in the period of the Trump presidency, when I saw a particular approach to prophecy and the Middle East among many of my fellow evangelicals in the USA, influencing policy in a way that concerned me. This was then followed by responses to the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change that also attempted to frame these approaches in end times terms that I feel range from highly questionable to wrong, however sincerely done.
2,000 years of human history is a long time. As you've studied that time period, has there been any constant themes that you've seen in our end times era? Any differences? Anything that's surprised you?
Well, there certainly have been constants. Basically, any catastrophic current event tends to be viewed as an end time significance. From my studies, it would be the Magyars and the Vikings in the 10th century, the Crusades, the Black Death, bubonic plague on this side of the Atlantic and elsewhere, the turbulence, the Reformation, the British Civil Wars, the Puritan settlement of America, Napoleon. We've seen it in the COVID-19 pandemic and the invasion of Ukraine. For example, Pat Robertson last month bringing out revising and redeploying predictions regarding Russia that failed in the 1980s and 1990s. Differences, though, the shift to the political right is a clear 20th and 21st century phenomenon, largely due to the way end times beliefs were approached during the Cold War, I think. That's not unique, but in the past, end times beliefs often were more socially radical. Surprise is, it's that despite a track record over 2,000 years of mistakes, fellow believers rarely admit errors, they revise and repeat the same views, and spend such a lot of time on end time speculation, regardless of scriptural warnings not to do so in, for example, Matthew and Acts.
So what is our problem? Why does the church consistently get end times speculation wrong, and up till now anyways? And how do we avoid this seemingly endless loop of error?
Why does it happen? Well, primarily, I think, because we ignore those scriptural warnings. We just find it too tempting to try to speculate about the day and the hour. But also, I think there's a tendency to quarry scripture and bolt together verses in order to construct timetables, not paying sufficient attention to their genre, their context of writing, and questions of whether a literal, allegorical, or pictorial message is being studied. How might we avoid it? Just some suggestions. One's pretty obvious. Spend more time on kingdom building and less on end time speculation.
Yes.
Be more sensitive to the context and genre of scripture. Revelation is a key example of this. Don't assume that just because something is a big issue now, it must have end time significance. The 14th century Black Death, when somewhere in the region of 30% plus of the European population died, was a very big issue. People at the time thought it was the end of the world. It wasn't. And also, if it leads to political and social outcomes that clash with gospel principles, alarm bells should be ringing. Mm-hmm. Prophetic fulfillment is no excuse for behaving in a way that clashes with New Testament teaching. Sounds obvious, but look at the history.
Yeah. No, that's good.